Hello friends, welcome back. Myself Pushpender Singh, and we are going to start with our daily current affairs. So today you have 26th of May 2021. All right, and these lectures are meant for those students who are preparing for the civil services examination as well as other government competitive examinations. And you can supplement your preparation with the help of these lectures. These lectures are entirely based on the current affairs that we are referring from the national newspapers like the Hindu or Indian Express. So you can subscribe our channel on the YouTube for these current affairs lectures. Alright, so let's begin with the lecture. Okay, so first news about Vesak. Okay, so first of all, I would like to give you a very happy Buddha Purnima because today is the day when the world is celebrating the Buddha Purnima. Okay, so here the Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to celebrate, right? Going to deliver a keynote address, right? On an international event that is being organized to mark the Buddha Purnima or Buddha Purnima Divas. So today, on the 26th of May, right, we celebrate the Buddha Purnima. Okay. So this event is being organized by the Ministry of Culture, right, as well as the International Buddhist Confederation. I'll come to that. What is that International Buddhist Confederation? But this is a very important event which celebrated throughout the world as a Buddha Purnima Divas. Now, the Vesak is basically the most sacred day, the most pious day for the Buddhists around the world, right? And it is basically celebrated as the Buddha Purnima Day or the Buddha Day. All right. So now let us discuss about the International Buddhist Confederation. What is this, the International Buddhist Confederation, and how this International Buddhist Confederation is having the stake with the Ministry of Culture for the celebration or for the commemoration of the Buddha Purnima Divas. So you have to understand a bit background for that. So seeds for that International Buddhist Confederation was basically put in basically in the November 2010 when you have the Lama Lokjang. The Lama Lokjang was basically a Buddhist guru when he visited to Sri Lanka. Okay, then Sangha members means the grouping members basically, suggested at that point of the time that the India, right, where the Gautam Buddha was born, right? So India, should host a large scale international Buddhist conference. Okay. The planning on the celebrating or the hosting of this large scale Buddhist conference was then begun. Okay. And this was one of the largest international gatherings of the Buddhist ever take place on the Indian soil. That was the Global Buddhist Congregation that was happened. Okay. And that suggestion that was made at that point of the time in 2010 was made a permanent umbrella body for that purpose. Okay. And the suggestion was made that a permanent umbrella body should be made to to carry out all such formalities related to this confederation, okay, or related to their proposed meeting. Okay. And it was decided that it was decided on the vision of this global Buddhist congregation that was held in India at that point of the time, right, to represent the interest of the Buddhism in the world. So here, a subcommittee or a working subcommittee met, right, at the the India's International Center, which is located in Delhi, right, to prepare a ground for the formation of this international Buddhist body, right, in basically August 2011. Okay. And now, first time in November 2011, the New Delhi was basically hosting this global Buddhist congregation that was attended by almost 800 delegates, right? And almost observers from Buddhist organizations throughout the world. And this was to spread out some of the modern the aspects related to Gautam Buddha, right here. So under collective wisdom, under a unified voice, right, the attendees of this this global the congregation, right, has decided or unanimously adopted a resolution to form an international umbrella body that was known as the International Buddhist Confederation. So here, the International Buddhist Confederation is basically umbrella body. The main purpose of this body is to create the role of the Buddhism on the global stage. Okay, so as to help to preserve the heritage, share our knowledge, to promote values, right, to represent the unified front for the Buddhism, and to enjoy the meaningful participation in the global discourse. So right. So regardless, you must understand, regardless of the doctrine, the difference within, within various Buddhist traditions, they are far more unified, right, in this sense. And here it also includes the charter, which basically finalize this global, or the International Buddhist Confederation in that respect. So the International Buddhist Confederation ultimately was registered on November 2, 2012, following this global confederation that was held in August 2011 in Delhi, right? So it was basically registered as per the statutory requirement under Indian law. So it was registered, right, as a 10-member, a governing body, right, for that purpose, and it was basically registered as a body at the International Buddhist Confederation for that purpose. Okay. The significance of that day, first of all, you must understand the significance is very high. It commemorates the birth, enlightenment, and the death of the Lord Buddha. The Lord Buddha, who is also considered the founder of the Buddhism, or who is also known as the Gautam Buddha, right? He's the founder of the Buddhism. Okay, and it is a day when, when we have taken the place on the same day, right? The day of observance that we talk about is basically falls on the full moon day. Full moon day, that is a Purnima day on the month of May, right? In the Hindi calendar, you can call it as a Vesak. Okay, and on the full moon day, whenever it is falls the month of Vesak, we call it as a Buddha Purnima. So this year, the Buddha Purnima was celebrated on 26th of May. Okay, and it was also recognized by the United Nations General Assembly by a resolution in 1990, right? It was recognized as the International Day of Vesak, which is the most pious, the most important day for the Buddhist, and it was done to acknowledge the contribution that was made, right, to the humanity by the Buddhism, right, because of its universal principles. Okay, so the Vesak that we are talking about, this Vesak is nothing but is the most important Buddhist festival. Okay, it is also known as the Vesak or the Buddha Day. It is celebrated, the Buddha's birthday, or some of the Buddhists basically marks, his enlightenment when he basically discovered the life's meaning. Okay, so it is a time to reflect his teachings, and that it means to the Buddhist. So the Vesak, which is also known as the Buddha Jayanti or Buddha Purnima or Buddha Day, right, in different parts of the world, right? It is a holy day which is traditionally observed by the Buddhist and the Hindu in the basically in the South Asia, right, as well as in the Tibet and the Mongolia also. So the festival commemorates the birth, enlightenment, and the death of Gautam Buddha, right, in the Theravada Tibetan Buddhism, right? It's a tradition which is basically related to that. Okay. So regarding Buddha or regarding Gautam Buddha, as I told you that Gautam Buddha is basically the founder of Buddhism, right? He was also born basically in the 6th to 4th century BCE, before Christ. Okay, he was born in Lumbini near Kapilavastu, right? And he was born in the Sakya Republic, which was also related to the Khosla kingdom in Nepal. Okay, and he died basically in the Kushinara in the Magadha kingdom. Now it is located in India, right? And he was considered the founder of the Buddhism, which is a major religion and the major philosophical systems in the Southeast Asia, as well as it is spread, right, in almost all of the continents in the world. All right. So he is Gautam Buddha who spread the knowledge regarding the universal truth, and he got the enlightenment, and hence he was considered as a founder of Buddhist. Okay. Next, hate speech. As there is no definition of the hate speech, right? There are various issues related to the hate speech is being circulated in the social media, and many times what happens is law enforcement agencies falsely implicated the persons based on such hate speeches. So it is a very subjective term, right? There is no objective criteria or objective definition for defining this hate speech. So a panel was constituted by the Union Home Ministry to suggest the reforms in Indian Penal Code, right? So that it could propose some of the separate section, right, which could basically related to such hate speech or related to speech and expression, where we could easily find out what could amount to this hate speech. Okay, as there is no clear definition for the hate speech. So here a committee for reforms in the criminal law is attempting, right, to find out such definition in the Indian context. Now let us understand what is this Indian Penal Code is all about. We are talking. See, Indian Penal Code was basically formalized in 1862. Okay, it is basically a primary criminal code, right? At that point of the time when it was drafted, right? And it was drafted during the British Raj in the year of 1850, right? And then it was presented to the Legislative Council in 1856, right? And then it came into force on the 1st of January 1962, right? So it was the code which covered various offenses, like you can understand, like it also provides certain punishment. Also, like you can understand the crimes which are against the body, like you can understand, the murder, kidnapping, culpable homicide, or crime against the property like theft, dacoity, or the economic crimes like cheatings or counterfeitings or various other crimes which were basically enumerated at that point of the time, right? And then in 1973, you had basically the CRPC or Criminal Procedure Code, right? This code is the procedural law which provides you the detailed procedure for the punishment under the penal laws. All right. So it is a basically procedural law. It provides you the detailed procedure for the punishment. Okay. So it thereby enforced and administered the Indian Penal Code that we are talking about just now, right? So it is a procedural, it provides the procedural law, right? Detailed procedure for the punishment, and hence it administered the Indian Penal Code as well as various substantive criminal codes, right? It was ultimately enacted on 1973. So what we are talking about is basically this Indian Penal Code is something which is the most important code in this Indian context. All right. Next, this committee that we are talking is expected to submit this report very soon to the Ministry of Home Affairs, and based on that report, we will be deciding what could amount to this hate speech. Okay, and the various suggestions which have received by this committee for the reforms of the criminal law, right, as well as the suggestions which were, as well as the recommendation which was made by the committee, would be examined by the Ministry of Home Affairs before any changes could be adopted in the Indian Penal Code. Okay, but the Bureau of Police Research and Development have defined what could be the hate speech, right? So here, for the purpose of the investigation agencies, right, for the purpose of some sort of a cyber crimes, right, it defines a hate speech as a language that basically insult the person, that threaten the person, that targets a person, right, on their identity, on their traits, right? The traits may be related to the disability, religion, or maybe the sexual orientation. That is basically definition of the hate speech or hate crime that has been defined by the Bureau of Police Research and Development. So what is that Bureau of Police Research and Development? It is basically, and it's a body, right, belongs to the government of India for the modernization of the police forces, right? So here it was set up in 1970 way back for the purpose of the modernization of police forces. All right. Next, ICOAI ICSI. What is that? It is ICOAI means Indian or the Institute of Cost Accountants of India. Okay, and ICSI means the Institute of Company Secretaries of India. Now, what is happening is that there was MOU that was signed between these two institutes, or the Institute of Cost Accountants of India and the Institute for the Company Secretaries of India. An MOU or Memoranda of Understanding was signed. Now, the Union Cabinet have granted ex post facto approval. Ex post facto approval means from the back date, it has granted, right, the approval of to that MOU that was basically signed between these two institutes. Okay. Now, let us understand what is that. What is that Institute of the Cost Accounts of India? So first of all, the Institute of Cost Accountants of India, right, is previously also known as the Institute of Cost and the Works Accountants of India. It is a premier statutory body. Statutory body means it has been set up, or it has been established by the Act of the Parliament, right? And it is a premier body which basically deals with the professional accountancy body, right? It is under jurisdiction of the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Okay, and its main purpose is to promote, to regulate, to develop the professions of cost and management accountancy. All right. And the second one which we are talking about, the Institute of Company Secretaries of India, right? It is again, statutory professional body, right? Statutory means under, you must understand, it's set up by the Act of the Parliament. It is under Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Okay, and the objective is promoting, the promoting, regulating, and developing the profession of the company secretaries. So it is basically related to the company secretaries. Okay, and this body, the first body, is related to the cost and management accountancy. Okay, so both bodies, you can understand, both bodies are basically promoting, regulating, and developing these professions which are related to, the one is basically related to accountancy and another is related to the company secretaries. All right. So the Institute of Cost Accountancy of India, as I told you, that is established by the Special Act of the Parliament, right? And it's a statutory professional body for the purpose of regulation of the cost accountancy. Okay, and it is also been empowered to recognize the statutory professional body also as a licensing body of India for the purpose of cost accountancy. And the second institute is again a statutory body, again set up by the Act of the Parliament, right? That is the Company Secretaries Act 1980, which basically provides them, right, some sort of regulation promotion with respect to the company secretaries in India. Okay. Next, supermoon, right? Supermoon is the phenomena that the world is observing on the May 26th this year. Okay, it is the moon which will have the nearest approach to the Earth. Right, it is the moon which is having the nearest approach to the Earth. Right, therefore it is basically closest and the largest full moon. Right, which is appeared to the Earth right on 26th of May 2021, and hence it is also called the supermoon. Okay, now this event that we are talking about as a celestial event is also known as supermoon, is basically coincide with this year's that lunar eclipse, which is also falling right on the same day, that is May 26th. So it is coinciding with that May 26th, right? And the supermoon and the total lunar eclipse, right? Not have occurred together in the last 6 years, but the first time they both have occurring in the similar day, that is 26th of May 2021. So what is that supermoon? For that you must understand. For that, see, on May 26th, what is happening is that the two celestial events, that is the supermoon as well as the solar eclipse, right, that is falling on the same day, right? So here one is the supermoon, another you have the total lunar eclipse, right? Which is when when moon and the sun are on the opposite sides of the earth, right? When the moon and the sun are on opposite sides of the earth, and because of this total lunar eclipse, the moon will also appear to be red, right? And this is because the earth will block some of the light from the sun from reaching to the moon in that respect. All right, and and as the earth atmosphere filtered the light, it will basically soften the edge of our planet's shadow, and hence it will basically gives the moon as a deep and rosy glow, that is red. Okay, that we are talking about. Okay, the NASA or the US's the space agency, which basically notes the supermoon occurs when the moon's orbit is closest to the Earth, right? At the same time, the moon is full also. That is the most significant event, right, as a celestial event, right? As you know that the moon basically orbits the Earth, right? And there is always a point where the moon and the Earth distance is either furthest or either the minimum. So at the 2 point there will be there, and these points basically are called as the perigee and basically your apogee. The perigee and apogee. The perigee means it is basically the least distance, or the distance between the two. The distance between the Earth and the Moon is basically least. It is around 360,000 kilometers from the Earth, right? And the point which is the furthest point, or which is the most distant point, right, from the Earth, that is called the apogee. Apogee is around 4,05,000 kilometers from the Earth. So these are the 2 points, the perigee and apogee, which basically classify the distance between Earth and the Moon, that is the farthest distance and your the closest distance. So at the time that we are talking about, at the time of full moon, the super moon, which is basically occurring, that basically we are witnessing this year, right, will be closer to Earth by the margin of 0.04%. So here on the super moon that we are talking about, it basically the moon will be closer to the Earth by a margin of 0.04 percentage, as defined by NASA this year, right? And this is what we call it as basically the supermoon as an event, as a celestial event, right? And this term, that supermoon, was coined by the astrologer Richard Nolan in 1979, right? And this is what is the definition of the supermoon. All right, next, the Udhampur Srinagar Baramulla rail link project. So here the Ministry of Railway, in order to enhance the connectivity between the Udhampur, Srinagar and Baramulla, all three are located in the Jammu and Kashmir. Okay, a rail project was basically, was basically planned. So here the Ministry of Railways have reviewed the implementation of this Udhampur Srinagar Baramulla rail link project. All right. So here it is around 272 kilometers long, the railway line which connects the Udhampur to Baramulla and ultimately joining to the Kashmir Valley, right, that will be connected to the rest of the country, declared as a national project in 2002, in the way back in 2002, right? Out of this 272 kilometers, that is the proposed link between Udhampur, Srinagar and Baramulla, around 161 kilometers have already been completed. It basically consists of the tunnels, right? Different type of tunnels are there because Jammu and Kashmir is basically an, having the hilly terrain, like topography is very complex. So obviously you have to cut through the mountains to the hills, right? So you have to build various tunnels for that. So it's taking the time, right? But the actual completion date for the project is proposed to be April 2000 to 2023. Okay. Now, let us understand about this Udhampur. See, Udhampur, you might have also heard about Udhampur. Udhampur is basically a city and in the basically in the Indian Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, right? And it has been named after Raja Udham Singh, right? Which basically ruled at one point of the time, and it is also having the the northern command headquarters of Indian Army also, right? Next, the Baramulla. Baramulla is also is also a city in the Baramulla district in the Indian Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Okay, the Baramulla is located on the banks of the Jhelum River, which is basically downstream from the Srinagar. That is the state capital of Jammu and Kashmir. Okay. Now, this project that we're talking about, the Udhampur Srinagar Baramulla Rail Link project, is having different type of different type of works. For example, it is basically have been divided into different sections. So these sections you could see here. The first section is 25 kilometers long. It is being commissioned in July 2014, way back also. It is connecting the Udhampur to the Katra. Okay, the second section is basically 118 kilometers long. It was commissioned in 2009 itself. It was from the Kazigun to the Baramulla. The third section, which was commissioned in June 2013, it was from Banihal Pass to the Kazigun. Okay, and the fourth section, which is going to be completed in April 2023, is basically from Katra to the Banihal. It is basically consisting of different type of tunnels. It is very complex in that nature, and it is having the length of around 111 kilometers. It is in progress. So here you could see the cuts or the railway tunnels which have been cutted out all across the mountains, right, to connect this Udhampur, Baramulla and your Srinagar railway line. All right. Next, the national mission on the use of biomass in thermal power plants. Now here you must understand this is the mission which was implemented by the Ministry of Power, right? Which is basically to use of the biomass specifically in the coal-based thermal power plants, right? So here the ultimate aim of this mission on the use of biomass is to use that biomass in the coal-based thermal power plant that we are basically using, the coal-fired power plant. So we are using the raw material as a coal. Now the biomass would be used in association with the coal. So here the ultimate idea of this national mission on the use of biomass in the thermal power plants is to increase the level of co-firing from present 5% to the higher level. What is this co-firing? What is this co-firing? The level of co-firing. See, co-firing is the term which we use generally in the combustion. So co-firing is a combustion of the two or more different type of materials at the same time. So co-firing means the combustion or the burning of the two or more different type of material at the same time. So here the ministry is proposing to burn the biomass along with the coal together, right? Together from and to increase this level of co-firing from just 5% to the higher level, so that we could control the environmental pollution. Because here you must understand the advantage of the co-firing is that, what is the advantage of the co-firing? That an existing plant can be used to burn a new fuel, right, which may be cheaper, which may be more environmental friendly. So here the biomass, which is comparatively more cheaper, comparatively more environmental friendly, will be used along with the coal, right? So here it could run on the basically on the biofuel. It will have the advantage also to control the climatic change also. And second aspect here, to take up the research and developmental activities specifically in the boiler design, because this boiler is very important for the purpose of thermal power plants, right? So that it could handle the higher amount of silica, alkalis and biomass pellets. So what is that? See, boilers are generally used to produce the steam in the power generation. So the generation part of the steam systems use this boiler to add energy to the feedway supply to generate this steam, right? So this energy which is released from the combustion of the fossil fuels or from the basically process waste heat that is basically used over there. Okay, now it is also to facilitate overcoming of the constraint specifically in the supply chain of the biomass, right, related to the pellets, related to the agro residues, specifically in this respect. Okay, now the ultimate objective that we are talking about is that mission would also have the steering committee that will be headed by the secretary, right? Which also include the representative from various ministries like Ministry of Petroleum, Natural Gas, the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, etc. And this executive committee will also be headed by the member, that is the thermal power, right, CAE. And the duration of the proposed commission would be the minimum of 5 years. So here, that the Ministry of Power informed that there will be, the 5 subgroups that will be working over there. These 5 groups basically will be dealing. The first group will be dealing some sort of a research work on the basically the properties and the characteristics of the biomass. The second group will be working for, let's say, for the technical, and the safety notions related to the research and development related to the boiler. The third group will be working for resolving the supply chains related to operations and sensitization programs. The fourth group will be working for certification, for the design labs, for the testing, for the purpose of agro-based biomass pellets and municipal solid waste pellets that would be feed in this power plant, in the power plants, right? And the fourth type will be working for the regulatory framework for the economics of this biomass. So ultimate aim that we are talking about, right, is basically you have lot of problems. You have lot of problems like you have the coal-based thermal power plants is basically, is working on the basically on the coal. So there is a lot of issues like air pollution, right? And this air pollution is also coming out from, the stubble burning, right? The stubble burnings are basically, burned by the farmers on their fields itself, right? So you could reduce this carbon footprints if you could divert the stubble, right, and to make this biomass pellets and agri residues, right, solid waste, pellets that could be used for the purpose of this energy transition in our country, and we could move towards the more cleaner energy sources of this fuel. All right, next, the expert committee on the investment funds, right? So here the International Finance Service Center Authority, right, has constituted an expert committee that is basically on the investment of the funds, right, and that will recommend the map for the purpose of the International Finance Service Center in India. Okay, so this committee that we are talking about, this expert committee which has been set up or which has been constituted by the International Finance Service Centers Authority, is being headed by, or it has been chairmanship by the Mr. Nilesh Shah. The Nilesh Shah is also the MD or Managing Director of Kotak Mahindra Asset Management Company Limited or Kotak Mahindra Bank. Okay, and now this committee will also have different type of leaders or different type of experts from from fund management ecosystem, right, from the technology for distribution, for legal compliance, and for the operations also. Okay, now this International Finance Service Center Authority that we are talking is being established as a unified regulator, right, to develop and regulate these financial products and financial services and financial institution in international finance service centers in India that we are talking. Okay, now the fund industry have been playing a very increasingly important role, right, in intermediating between the seekers of the capital as well as the investors here, right? That International Finance Service Center that we are talking at IFSC, right, have been actively engaging with the stakeholders to to enhance the global reach of the GIFT city that has been set up in Gujarat, in Gandhinagar, Gujarat. So GIFT IFSC, which was set up by the Union Ministry in the Gujarat, right, its regulatory approach to benchmark with the global standard and to adopt some of the facilitative framework to provide the ease of the operations for the seeker as well as to provider of the capital for that purpose. So here the International Finance Service Center Authority is endeavor to develop the comprehensive and consistently regulatory framework which is based on the global best practices, all right, with a special focus on the ease of doing business, right, and hence it has constituted this expert committee which will basically on the investment funds to recommend, right, a roadmap to fund industry specifically in international finance service centers in India. Okay, the term of reference with respect to this committee is basically to recommend, right, the long-term vision for the operations of the investment fund in international finance service centers, right? And the second, to make recommendations with respect to the structure of the investment fund that will be ultimately will be used in the international finance service centers, and to identify the issues which may be critical for the development of these investment funds, right? Which are also some of the inter-regulatory issues, and also the terms or some of the important issues which is related to the hedge funds, right? Then your basically your private equity, PE means private equity, VC means venture capital, sovereign funds, family offices, as well as the professional services. So now let us understand what is these terms. See, hedge fund that we are talking is a basically is a pooled investment fund that trades in relatively liquid assets, okay, and is able to make extensive use of more complex trading or the portfolio construction, as well as some sort of a risk management techniques in an attempt to improve the performance of the company. Okay, that private equity that we are talking is basically a capital. Equity means a capital, you can understand, which is invested in a company or other entity that is not publicly listed or traded, right? What is this venture capital? See, venture capital is basically a funding which is given to the startups or the young businesses, to the entrepreneurs that show the potential for the long-term growth. And what is this sovereign funds? See, sovereign funds sometimes is also known as sovereign investment fund. Okay, and it's also sometimes known as social wealth fund. Also, it is a state-owned investment fund. Generally, it is a state-owned investment fund. Okay, that invest in the real or the financial assets such as the stocks, bonds, real estates, the precious metals, or even in the private equity funds also, right? So these sovereign funds are basically used to invest globally. For example, Saudi Arabia is using their sovereign fund, right, to invest in India for the purpose of investment in the bonds, real estates, in the stocks, in the precious metals, and etc. All right. Let's understand the new news, that is India Maldives relations. So the Maldives is a country in the basically in the Indian Ocean. So here the India and the Maldives, their relations have reached to the new height when the Union Cabinet have decided to open the new consulate general of India in the Addu city of Maldives in 2021. Okay, so the Union Cabinet have decided to set up this Consulate General of India in the Addu city. Now, let us understand what is the purpose of this consul, or who is this consul. Then we will learn what is this Consulate General of India. So first of all, let us understand what is this consul is all about. See, consul is a foreign office, right? Understand, consul is a foreign office, or you can understand is a public officer who is commissioned by the state. So here the India is commissioning that public officer who is generally an officer of the Indian Foreign Service, right, to reside in a foreign country, right, and for the purpose of fostering the commercial affairs of its citizens in that foreign country, okay, and to performing such routine functions, right, routine functions like the work related to visa, the work related to renewal of the passports, and etc. So what you can understand is that the consulate general that we are talking is basically a diplomatic mission, okay, diplomatic mission that is being located in the major cities, other than the capital cities, right? It is not situated in the capital cities, but it is other major cities where the work related to consular services like visa and the passports are more common, okay. And the embassy that is talking, right, for your information, what is the difference between the consulate general and embassy? See, embassy is also a diplomatic mission just like a consulate general, but the main thing is that the embassy is located in the capital city of any other country. For example, the Maldives capital where the India's embassy is located, okay, right? So it has various types of functions, right, with a different type of functions which are diplomatic in the nature. So cabinet approved this opening of this new consulate general of India in Addu city, right, and it was basically posted in PIB, right, on 25th of May 2021, right? Fine. And India and Maldives, that they have sharing the ethnic, linguistic, cultural, and religious bonds, right, commercial links with each other, right? And India is also promoting the links with the Maldives specifically through the neighborhood first policy, as well as the security and the growth for all in the region, right? These are the vision of the government of India in that process. Okay, now by opening of this consulate general specifically in the Addu city of in the Maldives would definitely augment India's diplomatic relationship, bilateral relationship with the Maldives also. So let us understand what is this neighborhood first policy. See, neighborhood first policy is a nation's destiny which is linked to the neighborhood, right? So here India's destiny which is linked to the neighborhood, that it specify the need of a peaceful and integrated neighborhood. So here the India's foreign policy, which is also actively focusing on improving the ties with the India's immediate neighbors like like Maldives, right, which is the term that we use basically in the context of the neighborhood first policy, right? And the second is basically the security and the growth for all in the region, that is the Sagar, right? It is basically aimed at safeguarding the maritime interest of the mainland as well as the islands which is falling in the Indian Ocean region. So here it is India's policy or the doctrine for the maritime cooperation in the Indian Ocean region specifically. The Sagar that we are talking about, the security and the growth for all in the region, is basically having some sort of a five or the four more important aspects. The first is basically security. Security means it is basically, you must understand, is that, right? Security in the sense of the coastal security, right, as well as the land and the maritime territory should be safeguarded, right? This is the first aspect. Second aspect is basically the collective action. The collective action. What is that collective action? Promoting, the collective action to deal with some sort of a natural disasters or the maritime threats, like you have the piracy, terrorism, or any sort of emerging, threats that is basically affecting these countries. And the third is basically, sustainable development. Okay, this sustainable development means working towards sustainable regional development through the enhanced, cooperation, coordination between those countries. And the fourth and most important is maritime engagement. Maritime engagement. What is that? Here, the countries which are located in the Indian Ocean region would be engaging, right, with the countries beyond their shores, right, which aimed at promoting the trust, right, promoting the respect for the purpose of maritime rules, for the purpose of maritime norms, right, and for the peaceful resolution of any sort of a dispute which is there between the countries. All right. So here, what we're talking about the Maldives, here you could understand that the Maldives is officially also known as the Republic of Maldives. It is basically a small archipelago, right, or small archipelago state, which is located in the South Asia, okay, and it is already, it is located in the Indian Ocean region, right. It is almost 700 kilometers from the Indian Ocean or from the Asian continent mainland. Okay. Next, the National Disaster Response Force Academy. Okay, so here the Union Cabinet have decided to create one more post, that is the post of director in the senior administrative grade, right, at the National Disaster Response Force Academy, Nagpur. Okay, that post will basically unify, right, the work which is done by the academy. So that post, right, would be entrusted to the senior and experienced officer, which would be in the range of the senior administrative grade, who can steer the institution as per the intended objective. So here you must understand the National Disaster Response Force Academy was established in the year of 2008. It was established by merging the existing academy that is known as the National Civil Defense College. This was also located in Nagpur, but instead of this college, it was merged with the National Disaster Response Force Academy. Now this new academy was set up in 2018, right? The main building of the National Disaster Response Force was basically is under construction, but till then it is functioning with the existing campus of the National Civil Defense College. Now let us understand what is the National Disaster Response Force. Then we will understand about the National Disaster Response Force Academy. So this National Disaster Response Force is basically Indian Special Forces or Indian Specialized Forces, which is constituted for the purpose of the special response. For example, now you have different type of disasters like cyclones, earthquakes, right, or any sort of a disaster that caused, right, in either because of natural reasons or because of man-made reasons. So it is a specialized force that basically deals with the special response specifically during the disasters, right. So this apex body for the disaster management in India is basically the National Disaster Management Authority. Both of these, National Disaster Management Authority as well as the National Disaster Response Force, was set up under Disaster Management Act 2005, which was passed by the Parliament of India. Okay. The second academy that we are talking about, the National Defense College or National Defense College, Civil Defense College, this was also, formerly known as the Central Emergency Relief Training Institute. It was set up in 1957 itself in Nagpur district of Maharashtra, right? It is the first disaster management training institute in our country. So this National Disaster Response Force Academy was set up, right, by merging with this National Civil Defense College, which was already located in the Nagpur. All right. So here the academy presents, academy imparts the training to the National Disaster Response Force that we have just now explained. In the states also, the State Disaster Response Force was set up, as well as the civil defense volunteers, which basically assist these national NDRF or SDRF companies, as well as the police forces, civil enforcement companies, for the purpose of safeguarding the lives and basically the man and material, specifically during this disaster time, right? As well as this institution will also training to the to some of those institutes which are also considered the training institutes in the world. Okay, so here It will also provide the specialized training to the important personals of the SARC as well as the other countries. So other countries' personnel will also be trained in the academy, specifically in the disaster mitigation, disaster management, as well as the specialized training will be imparted to them. So here, the creation of one additional post, that is the director of this NDRF Academy with a senior administrative grade post, right? Which will basically, under this director, the command and control of the organization will be entrusted, right? And that could steer the institution as per the intended objective of the National Disaster Response Force Academy. Okay. So here you could see the volunteers or the NDRF personnel basically standing nearby to, to have the training for the purpose of, the safeguarding the life and the material specifically with respect to the human habitation. All right. Next, the native or the indigenous tree species in the Mumbai. As you know that we have the cyclone Tauktae, right? The cyclone Tauktae was basically the very severe cyclone, right, which was originated in the Indian Ocean region, right? It has impacted almost the western coast of India, right? Now, this severe cyclones like that would be, witnessing in India, right, in the both the coast, in the eastern coast as well as the western coast. But what is facing in Mumbai basically is that, is that, sorry, is that the trees which are non-native to Mumbai is being fall down because of the high rainfall and because of the high winds. So here, the trees which are non-native, non-native means here you must understand the trees which are not living naturally or which are living and growing, or reproducing not naturally, but they have, some sort of exotic trees that have been brought from outside and that has been planted. So such exotic trees or such non-native species are basically fall down, specifically fall down during such high intense wind during cyclone Tauktae, right? So here it is not confused with the older trees or the trees, but it is something which is related to the non-native species which are not naturally growing or reproducing in the natural habitat where they are basically particularly planted over there, right? So over 3 decades, the government has imported various exotic species, right, and these planted across the cities in the country, including the Mumbai. Now, due to this, cyclone Tauktae, what is happening is that these exotic species are basically uprooted because of high winds and high rainfall. Now, such type of trees are basically found. For example, you have the gulmohar tree or the rain trees that are widely found in the Mumbai, right? But they are not the native trees, but they have exotic trees that have been, brought down from some of the worlds, right? So here, for the purpose of this native tree, the Mumbai Corporation, or the Brahm Mumbai Municipal Corporation have decided to now to grow and to plant only the native plants, and to produce only those species which can grow, which can live, and which can basically reproduce naturally in the particular region. So here, the Bombay Municipal Corporation have prepared a list of 41 native trees which could grow, which can reproduce naturally in the particular native environment, rather than of growing these exotic trees, right? Exotic species that can be planted in the Mumbai as well as in other part of the Konkan belt. So these 41 native trees which have been identified by the Bombay Municipal Corporation was basically Wad, Pimple, Umker, Kanchan, Kadamba, Gunj, Palas, Neem, right? These are the all species which can be considered as a native species which are grow, right, in the native place, right, uh, as a basically as a naturally, right, as a native plant, right, without any sort of, the assistance or without any sort of the exotic trees, right? So they can live, they can grow, they can reproduce naturally in the particular environment, and they are more sustainable, right, as their roots, as their attachment with the soil is very stiff, so they can basically sustain such type of the heavy winds and heavy rain during such cyclonic times. All right, so that's all for today. Thank you very much. We'll meet again tomorrow. Be safe, be at your home, right? And thank you very much.